Well, good evening, everyone. It's Justin here with the Just Your Average Fisho's live Facebook, not video, show this evening for show number 3. And what a massive show. Back to the Just Your Average Fisho's traditional roots. The founding member is here with us this evening, and we're talking all things Southern Calamari in Port Phillip Bay and Westernport Bay. What a massive panel we've assembled tonight as well. But before I go and do some introductions, I thought I might talk to you a little bit about what's in store this evening. Before we get started, of course, what's really important during this show is that you ask your questions and we'll put to air what we possibly can, because there's just so many of them. We're going to ask them to the panel. If you want to ask a specific person, just say their name, put the question in, and if it's a really, really good one, then we'll get it up as best as we can. And for the best 2 questions tonight, there is also some wonderful prizes. But before I talk about those, let's also talk about our wonderful, wonderful supporters. Now, again, this page is not sponsored. We're unsponsored. We're unbiased. And we can say what we like, which is why you follow the page. But thanks very much to a couple of people who keep allowing us to have some prizes for the wonderful people out there in social media land who give us some great questions. Mikey at the Rod Rack, what an absolute champion. I bought a rod rack off him. It was ripping quality. And tonight he's giving away an 8th place rod rack to someone who asks an awesome question. You just got to call Mikey if we say that you are the winner. There's a photo of it up there now. And you can put all your game reels in it, your rods, you can have it in the shed, powder-coated steel, absolutely fantastic. So thanks very much. Follow his page, The Rod Rack, on Facebook. Builds a ripping product, can send all over the countryside. So thank you very much, Mikey, for your support tonight. Of course, my local tackle store, Complete Angler Ringwood, has come up with a ripping squid fishing pack for some lucky viewer this evening. It's got a number of great jigs in it and a jig case, the whole works. So you can get on with your squid fishing adventures as soon as we can get back out there on the water, which hopefully, and if Dan the man is listening, let us out, scream and shout. But we won't go into that political BS because we've got so much to speak about this evening. So first visitor, an absolute stalwart in the industry when it comes to knowing things about Southern Calamari. He runs a fantastic show called The Live Well on Thursday nights through Facebook and a multitude of other platforms. He's been a fantastic supporter of the Mitcham Angling Club. If you want to join a club, join Mitcham Anglers. And here we go. Paul Carter, thank you very, very much for joining us this evening, mate.
No, Justin, thanks for having me, mate. It's nice to be here. You'll have to excuse my lip syncing there. I've gone all Asian theatre on you.
No, I think you're all right,
a little
mate.
bit behind, but that's all right. We've tried to work on it, but I'm a bit retarded with the technology stuff, so we're still catching up. Can I just start too by saying that with today being Anzac Day, massive thank you to those who have served and who will serve and are currently serving for the sacrifices you've made. Good job.
Thanks very much, Paul, for that very, very important message, and really looking forward to understanding a lot more about how you go about designing jigs and some of the interesting features about our Southern Calamari population down here in Melbourne. Our second guest this evening, Frogleys Offshore Rep, Gun, Fisho, Gerry Morsman, mate. How are you?
Good, thanks, mate. Thank you for having us on.
No, thanks for joining us on the show. Now, recently you put up a really nice photo of a big Southern Calamari. Tell us a little bit about it, the size. What do you reckon it went?
So that one was just over 50 centimetres, the hood, and it was off Ventnor and about 5 metres of water.
Mate, did you feel like you were going to get spooled, or did you think you had weed, or what was the go there, mate?
No, I was certain it was a good squid, but no, I was pretty under control, I think, mate.
And what was the jig that bad boy came on, mate?
I've actually got the exact one right here, mate. It's a Matecraft Eggy Zo. Can you see it there?
Yeah.
The green with the gold belly.
Fantastic. What a ripping squid that was, mate. And may we get out there and get some more shortly. Now, of course, our next guest, founding member of the Just Your Average Fisho's page. He thought he'd change up the way that reports were done for a reports fishing page. A close friend of mine, someone who I do a substantial amount of squid fishing with. Luke Gavalis, mate, welcome this evening. Thank you for joining us. I know you're busy and got a lot going on. Great to have you here, mate.
No, thank you. It's good to have everything come to fruition from where it started 4 years ago, 18 years old, sitting at a cafe and wanting to express our fishing adventures with the public with no specific agenda. just get active within the fishing scene, and how it's all come to fruition, as I mentioned, through yourself, and the contribution of a lot of others has been pretty cool and pretty amazing. It's been good fun.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, mate. And thank you very much for allowing us to step it up a notch. And we're now going broader and bigger and wider. And the page has got such a wonderful following. And I think that I'm hoping that we're doing a good benchmark for the reports and the tips articles. Now, we've got you on board this evening because we are talking a lot about Port Phillip Bay as well as Westernport Bay. Tell me, Luke, your biggest squid, what jig and where?
Yeah, something that I'm rather disappointed, I suppose, to say to date is it still only sits at 39.5 centimetres, which for such an avid squid fisherman is not where I want to be. But we've had a lot of large ones on my own boat. Just haven't caught it myself. But it was actually land-based. It was off Portsea Pier on a westerly, slightly calm night, full moon on this exact jig. It's not just the exact jig, it's still alive somehow. It's the Haramitsu Batman, which was a collab Haramitsu jig made by an independent person in Australia. The specific Batman, like I said, was the actual one used. 39.5 off a land-based Portsea Pier. Anyone who's been to Portsea knows that it's about a 5 metre drop down there. So lucky on that day, I'd actually purchased a 5.5 metre extendable net. So managed to land that bad boy, which was quite an achievement, land-based, I suppose. So while it still hasn't cracked the big numbers of 50s and 55s on the hood, it was still a great feeling, and got a gummy that night as well, mate. So I stand by the Batman.
Well done, mate. Now, you do a lot of boat and land-based fishing, so we're going to come back to you. Now, first, I just want to get back to Paul. And Paul, thank you very much for joining us. You're a very, very busy man. You do work some early shifts, so thank you. You've been working with and for Gangcraft for many years, which is synonymous with squidding, more so in Japan, but also very much in Australia. Tell us a little bit about your history with Gangcraft and how far egging goes back for you.
So, your Gangcraft, that all happened by accident, to tell you the truth. I was sponsored by another couple of Japanese lure companies who used to look after the brim scene when I was fishing some tournaments, and it wasn't that many of them, but they used to look after us with product. And a couple of guys came over from Japan, and it wasn't from Gangcraft, it was another company. And they said, "Can you take a squid fishing?" I said, "Oh, yeah." We were bass and brim fishing, so we took them squid fishing, and one thing led to another. I became the guy to go squid fishing with in Australia, and from that, I went and did some uni courses to understand the squid a little bit better. I went and did some design courses to understand how to write CAD language, and so start designing product on a computer. And yeah, they offered me a gig, and that was 10 years ago, and I'm still kicking around with them. I'm also working with another 5 companies now over there as I suppose you call it a subby. So we do some design products for them, and yeah, that's how it all happened.
Fantastic, mate. Now tell us, Southern Calamari, I have to say to any fishing shop out there, the importance of squid fishos and the growth of calamari fishing in Melbourne at the moment, until the lockdown, is just going gangbusters, to say the least. And I'm sure that you've had a lot to do with that. Tell us how you've seen egging evolve, and what do you think's really contributed to that here in Melbourne?
It's evolved substantially. I mean, let's all go back 15 years ago. How many people were fishing with actual fishing, squid fishing gear like Eggy Specialist gear? The answer is 0. We were fishing with 50-pound mono and a Yojiri shrimp hunter with a 2.5 ounces of lead hanging off the back of it. And it's come a long way, I suppose, with the opening up of the world. That, you know, the market's got a lot smaller now that we've got things just like this. You know, we've got social media now where we can get on top of everything. Education's really come a long way. We sort of, when you look through the 80s and 90s and even the early 2000s, we had zero education pretty much. It wasn't until we started being more curious on what was happening on things like YouTube or Idiot Book, like we're talking on now, that people started to look at alternative techniques, and squid fishing was one of those. And with squid fishing being something that a 4-year-old kid can do all the way through to a 90-year-old man, you can jump on a pier, you can jump on a boat, you can walk down a beach, you can do it just about anywhere. And because it is so accessible to everyone, it's something that really has progressed really fast.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about, now you've got a lot of the science behind the southern calamari, and a lot of people wouldn't realise, I suppose, just what a regenerative species they are, how long they live for, and just how many there are actually out there. But I suppose with that information though, and with the growth of eggy fishing, particularly in the state of Victoria, there's also a lot of pressure. Do you see that as being the case?
Yeah, look, the pressure, when you look at the pressure we have in Australia on squid is negligible. Everyone in Victoria could go out tomorrow and kill 10 squid and we wouldn't put a dent in them. Actually, just everyone do it. When this lockout finishes, go and kill 10 squid. It's not going to hurt the population of them and you're going to have a good feed. However, when you look at places like Japan, they sell more squid jigs in one day than we sell in a year here in Australia. And the place is half the size of Australia. So the pressure is massive compared to here. So that species they catch in Japan, which is the Sepioteuthis lysonius, the rounder one, or northern calamari, we catch them in Australia too. But the pressure on that species is immense. The pressure on our species, who cares? Go and kill them. They're all right. Meant to taste all right. We got plenty of them, and they are really good at recovering themselves. So when the numbers are low, they're really good at Hushmakundi. They're good at repopulating themselves really fast. To give you an idea, the average population doubling time for a bream is 13 years. The average population doubling time for a squid is 11 hours. So they only live for a year. So take advantage of them. Don't let them die of old age. They're better off in your stomach than they are in an old people's home on the floor. So, yeah.
Okay, so fantastic. Now, is there any truth to it that obviously the wonderful grass beds are around Westernport Bay and Port Phillip Bay particularly, because Port Phillip Bay is that little bit less tidal and perhaps a little bit more accessible to boat fishers, also can be a bit easier in some of the conditions as well. The known squidding areas, the southern Port Phillip grass beds, the grass beds do move with the tides, obviously year to year. We know that from Google Maps. But with consistency, what you're saying is with consistent pressure on those grass beds, fishers that are saying, oh, look, the squid are smaller or there's less numbers of them when I go to those same areas, you don't think that that's due to pressure? That's more probably related to when they're actually having Ushmakundi and doubling up? Or
Yeah. So a lot of that comes back to angler effort as well. So, we might concentrate on one area consistently, and then if Victorians are the most shocking for it in Australia, they push a number into a GPS, say, I caught squid here last year, I'm going to this spot, and they don't catch any squid. Why? Because the seagrass had moved on. Now, one of the bad things about our seagrass moving is that if they're spawning in that seagrass and it moves, squid return to the place they were born to respawn. So if that disappears and goes, there's less chance of that squid spawning in that same area. It needs to find another congregation of squid nearby. So that can have an effect on it. Environmental pressure is probably worse than angler pressure, especially when we have a lot of drought and then have a massive rain event. So the crap that flows out of the Yarra, the Dandy Creek, the Werribee River is disastrous for very young or juvenile fish. The nitrate levels go absolutely nuts, and then the squid just don't have, or even any fish in Port Phillip Bay or Westernport for that instance, don't have the chance to grow from that really tiny little fish to an adult fully functioning squid. So yeah, that's probably one of the worst effects that we can have water quality.
Yeah, okay. Now, I know that you're very busy with a number of different projects and squid fishing, actually going out and squid fishing, and I know that you do a lot of lure development in freshwater or spotted river fox development as well. Now, tell me, when you do get out for an eggy fish, what is your, it doesn't matter if it's really expensive or if it's not, what's your favourite weapon of choice when it comes to a squid stick and reel and some braid? Please tell us all.
I'll go over here. This is pretty easy. So for the squid stick, I nowadays use, as I smash that rod on the roof, nowadays I use that there. That's a Super Violence Jerk by Gangcraft. If you go out tomorrow and buy one, you're an absolute clown. You don't need to spend over $1,000 on a rod. That's fact. You can catch squid with a hand line. But I use these things because I do it all the time. This is what I make part of my living out of. So I do spend a fair bit on gear. Other than that rod, then there's the normal violence jerk, which is, I've caught everything here, which is another very expensive rod, but very versatile. So the reason I do have these more expensive rods is these rods do what 4 or 5 other different squid rods will do. So I spend more money on one rather than having 10 to 20 different outfits. Reel, that's a Shimano Stella HGS 2500. Again, you don't need a Stella. If you reckon you do, you're off your head. It's just a reel. Get yourself a 2500 size reel, mainly because the retrieve rate suits the action that you want to impart into the jig. And for line, this is my main weapon of choice. That's Gosen 16 strand. The most technologically advanced line in the world, bar none. It's the thinnest and the strongest you can get. It's the roundest. It's really super expensive too, and that's one of the drawbacks when you've got really expensive line like that. It doesn't move as much. But if you want to spend a little bit less and have something that's just as good, the Wild Jerk is the other one I use, another one done by Gosen. This one actually has a weighted core to it. So it's a titanium core on the inside, so it allows that line to sink, which allows your jig to present better as it sinks through the water column.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that info. Now, I suppose just before we go on and talk with some of our other guests, Paul, let's say for a moment that you can de-weed the boat, you can break it out, the weather's looking conducive to a decent squid fish tomorrow, and you're free. Where would be your location choice and water depth and jig size choice?
What month is it now? It's April.
End of April, coming into May.
I would launch at Hastings and I would drive down to Point Leo and I would tuck in between Balnarring and Point Leo there in about 7 metres of water, and I'd fish a big jig. So at 3.5 at a minimum, 4.5 at an average.
Okay. Now, tell us about tides and tide movement. Is it a slack water fishery?
No.
When's your preferred tide?
If you got no flow, you got no go. But that said, I don't have a preferred tide. You can't catch squid sitting at home on your couch. Just get out there and fish for them. You know,
Yeah.
I've caught them on lows, on highs, on rise, on fall. You can just catch them. Just go and catch them.
Yeah, I'm with you that, interestingly, that a lot of people are taught to go fishing for squid at slack water, and unless you've got a reasonable amount of wind to give you some drift, you can find it very, very difficult. The thing is, with most fishing, you actually do need a fishing tide, and then that's why it's important to make sure that you're casting the right amount of line out the back so you can get the sink rate against your drift. Now, you've talked about size 4 and 4.5, and I'm a big fan of using size 4s myself. The availability in the Australian market, though, is pretty low. So if someone wants to try some bigger jigs, how do we go about it?
Go to your retailer and say to them, hey, stop buying stuff that you want me to buy and sell stuff that I want to buy. There's heaps of available product in that 4.5 size. In fact, when you go into the Japanese stores, and Luke will probably comment on this later when he's been over to Japan and seen, but when you go into those stores, the average size is a 3.5. So calamari squid are designed to eat bigger jigs. Size does matter. So squid hunt predominantly with their eye. If they can't see it, they can't eat it. They don't have a lateral line. They don't have a nose. So if they don't see it, they don't eat it. So the smaller you make your jig, the harder it is for them to eat. And the other thing is that squid are a bit like a drive-through animal. If I'm hungry, I go to one Macca's and buy a couple of meals. I don't drive to every bloody Macca's in Victoria and buy small fries. So I don't want to exert a lot of energy or get rid of a lot of fuel for a really small return. I want to put out less fuel and have a really big return. So squid are an animal that really concentrates on conserving energy and getting a big feed for a lot of little energy.
Okay. So tell us, so then that's probably, to someone that does what in your terms is the old Aussie style, which is the drift on the boat and just parks the rod in the rod holder, puts a lot of line out. Look, I'm guilty as sin for doing that, particularly when I've got the kids on board, but running a much bigger jig, you've got to learn how to work that baby. Tell us about the old whippy action. We're watching a lot of Japanese, and what's the importance of that when you're eggy fishing? Because until I learnt that and learned how to work an area, it's amazing the difference it'll make to your bag and the numbers when you know how to feel a jig when it's hitting grass and you can get some whippy action into it.
Yeah, so the squid jigs aren't designed to work up and down. They're designed to work left and right in a really sharp darting action. So if you're just Aussie style, we used to call it Greek style, upper pistol, where the squid just comes up from behind and touches your jig. Luke knew that one.
I heard that one, mate. Don't worry.
So we used to call it Greek style, and they just sort of sneak up from behind and grab the jig on one or two tentacles. And that worked. It's fine if you want to, dodge nets and dodge ink and make a mess of everything. But if you want them to actually attack that jig as if they want to eat it, you need to make it move left to right. And by doing that, you move the rod up and down really quick. Actually, I'll just quickly show you what I mean by moving it up and down really quick. So I turn the rod reel handle at the same time as lifting up and down. And what that does is it causes the jig to move left and right. And the reason I mentioned the reel size before, that reel returns between 50 and 70 centimetres a line on each crank. So every time I do that, I know I'm moving the jig 50 to 70 centimetres, and that's the action I want to impart. So you're going to find that it's going to move left and right rather than travel up and down the water column. And you've taken, when you fish Aussie style or Greek style, you'll find that you're taking that jig that looks like a piece of floating plastic and turned it into something that looks like food. And the minute it looks like food, that's when they start really aggressively just chasing down and attacking that jig.
Fantastic. Okay, now colours. Squid have massive eyes, but as you say, they don't have a nose. And you're a man that designs many, many jig colours. And I've got two questions for you. The first one is, how important is colour choice, and how many should you cycle through if you're not having the best day?
Yeah.
And then I'll ask you another important question in a sec.
Rightio. So squid are colourblind, right? So everyone out there, forget it. They can't see colour. However, they can see UV light that we can't see, and their black and white or monochrome vision is better than what we can see in colour. So making your jig look like food that it would normally eat is significant. Now, with colours, let me just go back over to here again, because I'll show you a couple of jigs that I've got there, and hopefully you can see. So what I've got here, so these are both what I would call a gold jig. So that one might not look like a gold jig to most. That probably looks a bit orangey. But underneath that cloth is a gold reflective foil. You can probably see it closer to me now. This one is exactly the same. The difference between the two, one's natural and one's ridiculous. So when do I use the ridiculous? I use the ridiculous when the water's a little bit murky or dirty because it stands out better in the water. And I use the natural when it's clear because they can see so well. Probably see that a bit better there. So it's a natural fish shape. Fish pattern on that. But as far as the foil colour underneath, that's what I select before. So I don't even look at the outside colour until I've had a look at the water. So the undercolour, the tape underneath or the foil, if the light is low, I'm struggling to spit my words out here. If the light's low, I use red. So for those who are looking at home, see the foil underneath's red. In low light and at night, red, because red refracts light better than any other colour and makes it more visible. Morning and afternoon, we go gold underneath. It's a bit hard to see that one there, but gold underneath, because gold refracts light better than any other colour at that time of the day. And all other times of the day, we want silver. And if you stick to that pattern, I use that pattern of colour selection all around the world, and I've never struggled to find fish.
Okay, thanks very much. Now, it wouldn't be fine Just Your Average Fisho style if we didn't ask a controversial question. And I've sat through a few of your talks before, Paul.
Yeah.
And you've said that a glow jig is a bunch of shit.
No. Glow jigs are good.
Okay, so you like to go glow jigs because I thought I'd heard you say once before that fish don't glow, so you don't go for glow jigs. No, they don't.
That's right. No? Fish don't glow. However, glow jigs were first designed in the late 70s, early 80s. They were brought out, first of all, by a company called JYAF. Everybody's heard of JYAF. Now, JYAF made that colour to use at the peak of the height of sun, but in dirty water. So we don't use it at night. Why? Because I've said this in my talks, if somebody served you up a pizza with glowing pineapple on it, you'd send it back to the kitchen. The squid are much the same. What does squid eat that glows in the dark? Nothing. So why would you tie a glow jig on at night? And you'll find that if you are fishing a glow jig at night, many of you do, that's cool, you will catch squid, but generally it'll be on one or two tentacles. Why? Because they're not chasing it as food. It's more curiosity, like, what the bloody hell is that? And they're sort of poking at it, and they get caught up by accident on one or two tentacles. And when they do get caught up like that, that's when you lose squid or you bring back half a tentacle, or it's not as productive as fishing a darker coloured jig with a red foil at night. So during the day, great. When the water's a bit dirty, to make it more visible so the squid can eat it is more important.
Fantastic. All right. Now, Paul, I'm going to give you a break. That was some sensational information there. Gerry, mate, I'm going to flick over to you. Now, you're on. Now, Gerry, you do a lot of fishing, and for those that don't know Gerry is the Victorian Frogleys Offshore Rep, and Frogleys do a lot of amazing products, Gamakatsu hooks, major craft rods, all different sorts of things. Gerry, you also have Gerry Morsman fishing page on Facebook, I'm pretty sure. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do, mate.
Yep. So we see yourself and your partner, Amy, battle it out on the old land base a fair bit. And that's both down at Mornington, but you've caught some big squid in Westernport. So, mate, can I just start off, thank you for coming on the show, but can I just start off by saying or asking, if you were to fish Westernport in your boat, where would be, or where would be your preferred time and location versus Port Phillip Bay if you're going out by boat?
It totally depends on, I think, how the weather's been the few days before it. So if it's been quite choppy, generally up the higher end of the bay, say around Tyab Bank and Quail Bank and places like that where the water's murky, obviously you're not going to have a very good chance. So if you go a little bit further south where the water's generally a bit cleaner, well, then I'd go south. So Ventnor's probably my favourite spot at the moment.
Okay, and what sort of depths do you really like fishing, and size of jig? What's your weapon of choice?
Depth, again, depends where I'm fishing. So if I go, say I'll go over to Port Phillip Bay, I actually like fishing anywhere from 1 metre to sort of 4 metres. Westernport, probably anywhere from 3 to 6 metres.
Yep.
And choice, did you say? Sorry.
Yeah, just your rod and reel choice and jig choice and colours. Just if you piling stuff into the boat, what's your weapon? Because you've obviously got some pretty nice stuff that you've got available to you.
Yeah, I've got a few choices, mate, because we do a few different brands. I won't go reeling off brands. I don't want to bore everyone. So the rod I'm using at the moment is an Atomic Arrows Eggy rod. It's a new one. I did have a Samurai Eggy rod, which I loved, but I jumped on my girlfriend's rod in the boat and snapped it and had to hand that over to her. So, yeah. That's my rod of choice. Reel, 2500 Stratic CI4. My favourite jig, well, the jigs I'm using I've showed them before. I'm not sure how well you can see the Major Craft Eggy Zo. So they're quite new as well.
Cool. I've had a little feel of the new Atomic Arrow Squid rod, particularly in the medium heavy, which I think does up to size 4 jigs. That's a really nice stick. And a lot of people don't realise that those Atomic Arrows are actually made by Major Craft. And my first ever squid rod was a Major Craft X-Ride, and that was just an amazing handmade Japanese rod. So you guys have been running with those for a while, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I don't mean to correct you there. They were made.
No, they were. Okay.
They were made by Major Craft. That's where they started off. But no, we make them ourselves now in a factory. So.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Well, you got to pump out the numbers and the quality. Changes need to be made. Now, tell us a little bit about your land-based fishing. Your partner, Amy, loves squid fishing. She tends to give you a bit of a towel up. Where do you like going land-based, and what are the times, and do you change up your jig size for going land-based?
Westernport or Port Phillip, mate?
Either one?
Well, Port Phillip off Mornington, because I live in Mornington, so it's a couple of minutes down the road after work, hour before sundown, 2.5 size jigs. You can go smaller. I like using 2.5s land-based in Mornington just because they cast a lot better. My favourite colour in Mornington is that green with Gold Valley by far. It's just my own personal preference. I know obviously your red foils and all that and your whites and blacks are really popular, but that's what works for me. And you're right, Amy towels me up all the time, and it's really frustrating.
Well, mate, you can only, when the COVID-19 bans lift, get out there and give it a good crack, mate. Now, if for someone that has the ability to use and try so much different gear, if you saw someone in a shop who wanted to make a decision on what sort of expense or what sort of stuff to go for, what sort of length rod or how much should someone be paying for their first outfit, do you think? Because we squidding attracts such a different variety of persons. So you said, say land-based or boat-based, what's a good in-between that you would suggest?
Probably 7.6, like that's my go-to length. You don't need to spend a lot on a squid outfit. Paul said that before. Like you can spend thousands if you want. You don't need to. As he said, you can use a hand line. You can get combos now for $100, and they will get the job done, and they'll last a while. So yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Now, if you're going to Westernport, do you still break out the old squid spike and a silver whiting?
This is honest. I've never ever fished for squid with a bait. I've never done it.
No, mate.
Always, yeah.
No, it still can be done. It's certainly the way it was done many years ago.
Effective. I know people that smash squid on the baits. I'm too fidgety. I need to move around. So I can't sit there and watch baits all the time.
Fair enough. All right, now we'll cross over to Luke. Luke, now for everyone, Luke was the one who started Just for Average Fishos a number of years ago, and he's a very close personal friend of mine, and we do a lot of fishing together. He's also probably one of the best land-based and boat-based squid fishermen that I know. Luke, we've had a lot of adventures, mate. If you go squid fishing tomorrow, which I know you would love to do because it's something that's so important to you, do you prefer land-based or boat-based, mate? And what's your weapon of choice when you're going to either do land-based or boat-based?
Yeah, perfect, mate. I think that's a subjective question depending on different variables. Do I go land-based because of access to the boat, or we all know, boat fishing, living in the eastern suburbs, it's a bit of a trek. It obviously costs a bit of money. There's a lot of different variables involved in boat fishing. Then yes, I'll go land-based fishing if maybe I'm limited on time. Therefore, I'd probably head straight to either or Blairgowrie or Portsea myself, just out of personal habit and personal experience over the years with the boys, especially when we were younger. If I was to go to Blairgowrie, personally, I'd be using a 3.5. I know Mornington, as Gerry mentioned, that probably is a very 2.5 style jig area, or a 3. I probably wouldn't use a 3.5 there, but even Blairgowrie, people look at me and judge, and it goes back to what Paul said about the size of the jig. For me, 3.5 or 4 is almost paramount in my own collection. I've got sub 1,000 jigs, as you know, Juzzy, and I think 20 of them are size 3, and maybe 5 of them are size 2.5. The rest are all 3.5 or 4. I'd head to Portsea fishing 3.5, definitely, but I would also obviously be taking a little dropper with me as well. So personally, I use a little JYAF beaded dropper, which is a little extra 5 milligram or extra gram drop weight to get the jig down in conjunction with whatever the tide's doing, or the current. As we know, it can be quite fast there. In terms of jigs, again, it follows on. I personally follow what Paul said, and that's through a bit of research, but a bit of self experience and just experimenting. Buzzy, better than anyone, I tend to take 100 or 200 jigs on a boat with me and filter through almost every single one of them until I find the right go. But it has narrowed down over the years to following on sort of from what Paul said. At night, I'll use a dark foil jig, but with a red base. So that's a little gang craft that I'm sure Paul can talk more about. It has got a nice little red base glowing under it. Falls back to the AK as well. I'm a Haramitsu bias fan, and my biggest collection friend Andreas Meneses follows it with me, and that's what I was using at night with the Batman as well. Again, size 3.5, mate. I've caught squid probably smaller than a 2.5 on a 3.5 and a 4 jig. definitely size for me is really only subject to current or snagability, really. Fishing across to the boat, if I'm on the boat, first place I'll go, mate, is Sorrento. That's just always been my thing. I've mainly really only fished Port Phillip. My squid spot will be out from the sisters, going between depths of probably minimum 2.5. If it's not happening in that spot that I've got it at 2.5, I'll move out to 5 or 6, closer to Gerry Yacht Squadron. Outside the sisters is a little drop off from about 4.5 meters, and there's a drop off into 10 meters as well. I've found with some really good friends who are probably just as good, if not better, squid fishermen, going through that drop of 10 meters into that 5 or 4 meter zone. We've got some absolute donkeys. So Paul might be able to explain a bit more as to why that might be the case. But yeah, that's my first go-to, mate.
We've done a lot of. We just lost you there for a little bit there, mate. Sorry for the technical difficulties. The No.3 network ain't helping us this evening with your connection there. But you were just saying that you like the Blair Gary Yacht Squadron and the Sisters, and that's something that we fished a lot. And my go-to recently is the Clicks Zeus 3.5, which is a custom design by Complete Angler Ringwood. I love the Hiramitsu as well. The RR, absolutely fantastic. Paul's laughing at me because he'll know the design of that jig. The Hiramitsu RR, you can't beat it. Fantastic jig. And, the one that you can't get anymore, the old Shimano Cephia Series 1 Olive, fantastic. But also true no squid jig collection, and no squidding is without me. You like the 14Ts and the 61Ts. Gangcraft Dead Butterfly, it's one of my favourites, particularly for during the day because it's got that silver sort of base on it. I like for using it at night as well because it's got the black on the top, and it's just a jig that's really well performed and is a part of that Gangcraft stable, so goes really, really well. Certainly in our boating adventures, we've done a little bit together in Mud Island as well. Mud Island, you tend to drift through the whiting fishermen there in about 4.5, 5.5 metres, and lately you and I have been fishing a lot deeper to research some of Paul's sort of advice, going a lot deeper because, squid, some of the best squid that I've ever caught is offshore when we're gummy fishing, and they follow up gummy baits from 38, 45 metres. So, it's quite interesting. The jig colour doesn't make too much of a difference on the offshore squid as compared to what it does in the bay. So, if you said, Luke, what's your land-based or boat-based rod and reel setup, mate? What have you got?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I'm someone who built up from the age of sort of 17, 18, based on what Gerry and Paul both touched on, the affordability aspect of it all. I was running, Shimano outfits and different outfits that were affordable. But nowadays, I have actually grown a passion to invest in a lot more gear. I run about 7 or 8 different outfits. It's all subject to the day, but personally, look on the boat, mate, through your experience as well and your recommendation, the JYAF Emerald, which is just this bad boy there. I've just got the JYAF Emerald. This is the MX model. I don't know if you can see it there, but this is, I think it's this. No, it's
just come closer to the mic there, Lukey.
Sorry, mate. It's the 7, just the 7 MX. That's my boat-based choice. And I'm running that on a Shimano Vanquish, which I purchased from Japan. I run a 3,000 size reel, based on obviously what Paul mentioned. So the 3,000 size reel is the same as obviously the 2,500 size, just with a deeper spool. That's just personal preference for versatility. Land-based and boat-based, again, I'll chop and change on a 7.6. I've got a custom made by a guy called GT Custom Rods, running on a Batagi blank with either Shimano 3000 Stradic size, or my personal favourite is the JYAF Emeraldus Air. This for me is a 3000 size reel, or 2508 as they call it, but it is a shallower style spool. This method of fishing with that sort of gear, land-based or boat, for me follows on from the action. So we'll actually fish on the boat with both styles that Paul touched on and yourself, just in terms of actually having a bit of a violent jerk whilst winding as well to create that darting action or that zigzag action. But we'll also have the old wog floater just hanging out the back. 9 times out of 10 when you're and we've done this together, mate. How many times we've been on a session, we've been flogging them on the jerk, and then both the back wog floaters are buckling over as well, or vice versa.
We also love the flaccid dropper by the engine. It's just the limp dick over the back. It picks up the followers all the time.
The limp dick always works, mate. Absolutely.
Couldn't recommend it to anyone that's fishing on a boat, and sort of works with a drift of about 2.5 k's per hour. Any stronger, and it won't really work. But unless you want to drop shot the jig down, but just the flaccid dropper just right near the engine. A couple of Aussie styles, as Paul calls it, hanging out the back, and then jerking around those in a not so flaccid state. I'd say for night, one thing that we learnt certainly when we've done a lot of night fishing in the bay, that working the sort of the transition edge of our LED light arc into the dark is where a lot of those squid sit and try and pick off the little bait fish that might be coming into the light. That's been a big difference for us, and I think you really cracked that code one night that we were out after gummy fishing, and you were just braining it, and we started following and did really well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that I think I'd be really interested to hear from Paul on this. Going back to that example you just used, when I was using that example of we were going through 10 metres around the Blairgowrie Yacht Squadron, we seemed to be picking them off as we were crossing that line into about 5 metres. Obviously, a drop off. Now, I mean, physics, I'm no physician, but I'm assuming that would have something to do with the shadow, perhaps on the change of depth, perhaps on the way that they hunt the squid, or where they sit and where they lie in the darkness and attacking as they pass through the lighter, as the jig passes through the lighter area, which is what we found that night that worked effectively. So love to hear from Paul on that. But yeah, absolutely, mate. It's all about chopping and changing and moving around. I never stay in the same squid spot. If the drift doesn't work, mate, we'll give it one more crack and then we'll move on to another depth or another area for sure. Yeah,
it certainly suits the active fisho, which you and I both are. Paul, I will cross over to you just back for a few minutes and talk about, the impact of moon and different lights at night. Is that something that people really need to critically be thinking of, or is it just more go any time and pick the right jig?
Critically, no. As I said earlier, you just go fishing. You can't catch them sitting at home. However, I avoid big full moons. So what happens when you get a really big full moon is the availability of light spreads over the whole area of water you're fishing. When you've got low light, they concentrate on areas where there is light. So that's why you go and catch so many off a pier at night, because that's where the food is. The squid don't necessarily like the light, but their food does. So they congregate on their food. Whereas when you get a full moon, you got to imagine that it lights up everything so much better everywhere, that the availability of food is further spread than it is concentrated on those synthetic light areas like jetties and piers and wharves where you've got plenty of light.
Yep, fantastic. Now, Paul, also a question for you that I've done this myself, where I've done my first ever land-based session and tended to do a little bit better than the other guys on the pier, because I mulched up some pilchards and dropped a burley cage over the side. And I think the reason why that was is not because the squid can smell it, but activity breeds activity, right? So if you get the bait fish around your burley pot and coming into your scent trail, then the squid are going to be picking them off. Do you think that burley is important to land-based guys, or is it something?
Not necessarily. No. Generally, if you're fishing land-based, you're fishing on structure that's going to hold food anyway. I wouldn't say it's critical, but it's not going to hurt. If you're finding that there's not a lot of bait fish around, go nuts, burley all you like, and you'll attract the smaller fish, which will come and eat on the burley, and then the squid will chase down on those smaller fish. But don't concentrate on where your burley's laying. Generally, the squid won't come in. If you can see the squid, they're harder to catch. I can guarantee you now there's people watching now who have stood on a pier looking at 20 squid below them and tried every jig they've got, every size they've got, and the squid haven't even looked at them. But if you cast away from that light and away from that burley trail, you'll find that the bigger squid are sitting on the outside, the ones that are actually hungry, ready to eat anything that comes out of the light.
Okay, cool, fantastic. Now, what are your thoughts now? There's a lot of land-based people that follow our show, Paul, and you mentioned before about buying tackle that we want to buy versus stuff that we're sort of force-fed in some respects by the wholesalers. Where did the invention of the 1.8 jig come from? Because I know that certainly down at Complete Angler Ringwood, the Mornington guys smashed and snapped those things up like no tomorrow, 1.8 Yamashitas and so forth. What's all that about, and is it really critical? So if they think it's so critical, is it just because they've all learnt the same action or the same fishing style?
No, a lot of it comes back to what has always been available in Australia. And we started buying squid jigs in the mid-'80s. I remember I was doing work experience at Rex's shop on Flinders Street back then when the first lot of jigs come in, and they were a 2.5 size Yojuri. And the reason why we got them was because there were so many in the market, we became the dumping ground for that product. So for about 5 years, Australians were all told, this is the one you've got to use. And that was all that they had available. So everybody had this thing in their mind that 2.5 is the size I've got to use, and smaller. So as more product became available, that's what they were conditioned to buy. Now, the 1.8s and the up to 2.5, they're designed to catch a squid called a Nauri squid, which is a little bit like, you've probably seen the ones you buy, Californian squid for snapper season. That's what they're designed to catch, a smaller fish that eats smaller prey. Calamari are designed to eat big prey. So I know a lot of people say at Mornington they use a 1.8 and a 2 and a 2.5 because the squid aren't as aggressive. They're more just inquisitive. They're not really eating. I've been down there before where we've had 50 or 60 people standing around us chucking those 1.8s with a sinker hanging off it, and they're catching one here or there. I'll bang a 3.5 out and I'll pick up 4 or 5 in 5 casts. So, yeah, the reason why those smaller ones have been such a big part of the Australian squid scene is because that's all that was available, and that's all we were told worked for many, many, many years. It wasn't until we started educating ourselves on what squid prefer rather than what we should be buying that we started buying gear to suit the squid, not gear that suited our style of buying.
Okay, cool. Now, before we sort of bring the panel together and we're going to answer a load of questions that our producer will put through to us, I just want to go to Gerry for a moment. Gerry, you do a lot of land-based, you do a lot of boat-based as well. Tell us about your Westernport ventures. You know, whilst we put up a lot of reports on squid fishing through, because Luke and I do a lot through Port Phillip Bay, tell us something, like you've said Ventnor is a really good area for you. What are some other good areas that you've tackled, and what areas might suit a particular tide versus one other that you've found in your sort of fishing experience in Westernport?
Land-based or boat, sorry, mate?
Either one. I'd like some comments on both if possible.
Yeah, okay. Well, top end, as I've mentioned earlier, top end, so Tyab Bank, Quail Bank, incoming tide, their squid will push up further onto that bank. Obviously using jigs, like bigger jigs, so your 3.5s. There's other areas too, so around Stony Point, so just off the pier, probably only about 100 metres off the pier, there's a big flat there out in front of that pier. When the squid is spawning too, that's a pretty well-known area where you can really get onto a big bag of squid there. Moving down to sort of all the way from Balnarring to Flinders. Like Flinders is a really well-known area. Just keeping in mind too, when you're fishing Westernport's a very tidal area. So obviously you don't want to be fishing too much in the mid-tide. Look, they might be feeding, but they're going to be very, very hard to catch. So you want to fish more the slack tide, or probably about an hour either side of that. So as you get further down towards the entrance too, they can get quite strong tide. So, yeah, make sure you're fishing around that slack tide.
Okay, cool. Now, do you find that squid perform in a better way in Westernport in a particular area at a different time of year? Like, do you have a different location for a different time of year that you like to go to, Gerry?
Yeah, so sort of just coming into summer, when there's that more sort of spawning time for them, yeah, you definitely get the bigger breeders in there. Yeah, and you're more of a chance of getting a big bag of squid, and really good size. Like, there's a 2 kilo squid in Westernport isn't very uncommon. We've probably got one of the best squid fisheries in the world. Well, we probably do. actually. I know Paul will be able to answer that for me. So we're pretty lucky. So, yeah, around that sort of just start of summer for me.
Okay, cool. Now, Lukey, I will ask you a bit of a question. Mate, you do a lot of land-based fishing. I don't do as much as you. So what wind or tide are you looking for to fish down at sort of Portsea or Sorrento, mate? Because you guys go when, you know, Hurricane Katrina could be going, and you've done very, very well on those nights. Tell me, what sort of conditions are you looking for when you're heading down to the pier for a night fish?
Yeah, again, quite subjective, mate, just because we are a little bit of a different breed in that sense. It's very much been a case of, can we get there? If we can find the times to get there, we'll go and just say, you know what, bucket, let's go. But the westerly is obviously quite good. I'm happy to have it down at Portsea, at Gary. Just anything that's not blowing in your face. Obviously, with Portsea, I prefer to go down the pier and all the way to the right of the end. You'll notice, obviously, a lot of people doing quite well at the start or the middle of the pier, again, with that same style of wind at the westerly. But look, personally, mate, I've made it work on either or. It's obviously just becomes a lot more difficult to fish. It's a bit more uncomfortable. It can be a bit more tedious and frustrating. However, it's not to say that I haven't done well on times when we've had a tough wind blowing across us. You make it work if you get the jig down and get it in the strike zone. For me, mate, it still does work. If you want to go fishing, it just goes up to Paul, get off the couch and go. And then, you know, I've had plenty of nights where I've only caught one and I've driven an hour and a half up and back, but it's fishing, mate, and I'm happy with one. But, yeah, you don't make the trip. We've had some really weird times, just as much as I had with you on the boat, mate, that day that we went. And we absolutely brained and flogged a lot of them with 5 people on the boat, fishing at about, correct me if I'm wrong, 5 or 6 knot drift wind or something like that. Speed was It was phenomenal. But we were just catching it on the candles and letting a lot of line out, just adapting to your situation.
Yeah, for sure. A couple of quick fire boat tips from me for Port Phillip Bay. If you have wind with tide, obviously that's really helpful, and then your wind would need to be less than your tidal flow if it's against tide. So you can still create some level of drift, and really anything over 1.5 k's will get you somewhere. That particular day that we were all there, we were about 6 km an hour drift, 100 metres of line out the back, and candle catching them, as Paul would say, Aussie style, because it's the only way we could do it without losing guys overboard and needing to deploy the life raft. Because we're in genuine 1.5 metre chop, because that's one of the other things that, you know, those choppy, shitty days that often keeps a lot of other fishers off the water are the days that we have absolutely brained them together, and big jigs have been really important to get down that strike zone, and also having eggy braid on your eggy rods. I didn't really start using it until last year on your recommendation, and having a sinking eggy braid has just transformed my squid fishing. You do pay for it. Look, Gangcraft do that amazing 16 ply. I've got a spool of it, but I haven't actually put it on yet. Mamoy eggy site is another really good one as well. Couldn't more highly recommend it. So what we'll do now is we'll grab the panel together, because I've got the first up question here for Paul. Paul, while you're listening, mate, and just as we get the panel together, does Gangcraft bring into Australia 4.5 or size 5 jigs?
Now, this is where I'm going to cheat a little bit here. No, they don't, because they don't make them. I'm fortunate I can go into the factory and make my own, so I'll get over to Japan a fair bit. Well, not at the moment, because there's some virus stopping me from doing that. But when I'm over there, I just go into the factory and make my own. They don't physically make one for the market. So if you are looking for a 4.5 or a 5, I would recommend the Yamashitas in that size, because they're the only ones that do them consistently well. There's a few companies that have done them, but some of them are absolutely Scheisenhausen, but I would stick to the Yamashitas for those. But yeah, look, if you're going to say one thing, if you're going to buy jigs just for calamari, 3.5 and 4 is the best way to go.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to order some size 4 Gangcrafts. I've got a size 4 dead butterfly, which came from Japan as a part of the collection. Chris, a fellow Mitchell Club angling member, asked that question, and they can be a bit harder to find, and we do want to support our local tackle shops, but if they can't get the gear from the wholesalers, it does force us, big jig collectors and avid eggy fishers to go online.
It's interesting you say about the wholesalers there. I know fact that the wholesalers have access to them. They can get them anytime they want. The retailers need to launch into buying them. So unfortunately, a lot of retailers are scared to invest into product they don't know if they can sell. And because people are still stuck on the 2.5 size thing, they don't want to invest in bigger jigs. I've brought bigger jigs to after shows. I've, introduced them to tackle stores before, and they all just say the same, yeah, nah, yeah, nah. If you ask your store, that's the key here. Forget the internet stuff. Go into your local and say to your retailer, hey, dude, I want to buy these. If he knows he can sell them, he'll buy them. If he doesn't know he can sell them, he won't.
Yep, fantastic. Certainly at Complete Angler Ringwood, who is my local tackle store, and they help us out with the prizes. They're a good bunch of guys. Steve and Lofty down there. It's one of the biggest retail squid collections going around. There are a number of fours down there, and we certainly looked peak season to get fours down there. And we've had 4.5s as well. A lot of my Hiramitsus have come from there as well, so particularly in the RR colour and bits and pieces. Now, another good question, Gerry. If you're fishing in the boat, mate, do you like to deploy a sea anchor, and do you have a preference to drift speed that you're looking for at all?
I have never really put out a sea anchor because I won't go out when it's that windy for squid. So, you don't want to be going any faster than 3 knots, really. It gets pretty hard. One thing you can do is if you are drifting pretty quickly, make sure you're casting with your drift. That will help. That'll bring a massive help. So if you cast against it, all it's going to do is cause your squid jig to come up to the surface, and it basically won't be skipping along the surface, but you're not in the strike zone. So cast with your drift, and it'll allow your squid jig to get down and be in the strike zone.
Yeah, much agreed.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. But I've personally used sea anchors, particularly where you might have a little bit of wind against tide to create a drift, or if wind is coming across the boat, because then you can steer with the motor and straighten up to use the tide. Now, Brad Watts, our last week prize winner. Paul, what's your thoughts on the jig spray scent? Do you use it?
Yeah, I do, because I'm a dirty, filthy smoker. I put fuel in my boat. I've got 2-stroke oil all over my hands. I put fuel in the car. I eat KFC or something on the way down there. I taste just shit. If a squid touches a jig that I've been touching, it tastes terrible. So I do use Eggy Max spray to put it on, because you wouldn't find, and a lot of people would have seen this, where squid will come up and they'll touch the jigs. Now, on those 2 candles, so because they don't have a nose, but on those 2 candles, they've got cells very similar to our taste buds. So when they touch the jig, they can taste my stank. So the best thing to do is to mask it, and I use the Eggy Max. The other spray I use, which is mentioned there too in the comment, is that Glow Max. Yep, I use it. Well, you can't see it there. Yes, I use it. That's a lot of people seem to think you use this stuff at night because it says Glow Max. There's not a lot of UV light coming off the moon, and this enhances UV. So if I want to use this, because squid can see UV light that we can't see, I use a Glow Max quite often.
Okay, and now Lukey, what's your thoughts on using scent for land-based? Do you use scent at all, mate?
I'm not going against the guru at all there, because he is the guru, being Paul. I have no belief in it personally. That's not my own experience. I don't have the study and education behind it as to why. It's obviously very valid. I've never had any issues without it, in my opinion. I may be wrong, because I may not have caught him in times when I haven't caught him because of that reason. But I've never changed the way I fish personally, and I've never used it personally, so I can't actually comment on its validity having it on. But personally, I have never had any issues without it, as far as I'm aware. So it's much of a muchness, and it's all something. If you're curious, I think for me to find out, or if you want to use something like that, just purchase it and try it and see if it makes a difference from what you were doing. Yeah, that's just my personal opinion.
Sure. Now, probably one for Paul, Pat Ellaby, who I follow as well. And if you've seen him, he's a pretty good fan of all of these shows. He's a retired ex-sea captain, I'm pretty sure, and boy, does he catch some monster fish and monster squid. He's a Westernport legend, I'd say. He's asked a really good question here, and I'm sure you can see that question there, Paul. So he's caught a large number of calamari over 45. Thanks for bragging, Pat, but you have. Your photos prove it. Sucks to be us compared to you that can fish Monday to Friday and not get blown off the water. He's caught a lot of them from March to August and during October and November, presumably at the end of their life cycle. Question is, do they spawn individually once or twice per year or en masse during certain months, Paul?
I reckon Pat's wife would argue that he's retired. He's spending a bit of time on planes over the last 6 to 12 months, I reckon. And, yeah, Pat's a hell of a nice bloke. One of my neighbours, actually, just lives up the road. Okay, the spawn thing, there's a lot of spawn that happens in Australia. So one of the reasons why our fishery is so good in Victoria and Tasmania beats us, by the way, sadly, but the reason it is so good in both Victoria and Tasmania is because our water temperature is conducive to spawning. So when you look at places like Japan or the US or places that have massive direct seasonal change. So in winter, it's icy, icy cold. In summer, it's stinking hot. So they only have certain times of the year where the water temperature is suitable for them to spawn. Now, in Australia, our temperate climate in Victoria and Tasmania is very even. So we have more spawn. So we have up to 14 in Westernport that we know of. I've got a nice spawn map so I can go and chase them exactly where they're spawning at the right time. That's a bit cheaty, but so we have about 14 there. Now, when it comes to the actual spawn itself, is it individually? No, they get into a big group. And the bloke has to pretty much impress the girl. So he's got to get on the dance floor sort of thing and show how good he's going to be to spawn. I'll just put that on while I'm talking about it. So what they do is they get together, and like you can see now, it's like an 18-year-old bloke at the pub for the first time. He's a bit nervous. He's sort of out with his mates, hanging at the bar. When he gets a few drinks into him and a little bit of courage up, he'll move out onto the dance floor and try and show off to the girl. So he needs to prove to that female that he's going to be good enough to spawn with. And as you can see there's plenty of squid in that background, so they spend a fair bit of time in big groups. What you'll find is that they'll start matching colours, matching patterns. And you can see here now, everything's identical. So he's trying to prove to her that he's good enough to keep up with her. Just like in real life, a better specimen comes along and cuts his lunch. And after they get to know each other, like they spend a fair bit of time. This goes for about 3 hours, each interaction. After they get to know each other a little while, they'll move off into a booth and have just a little bit of a cuddle. Excuse me. And then mummy and daddy time occurs where the bloke will roll upside down, just like this. He'll reach into his bag of tricks, grab what's called a spermatophore and feed it into her hood. Now, that occurs 14 times in Westernport. So what generally happens is that bloke who's just impregnated that girl, he'll only do that once or twice. For the person asking about what squid eggs look like, that's what they look like. So he'll only do that once or twice, but the female will take 200-odd partners. And, once she's laid those eggs like that, she'll fall to the bottom and just die because she's shagged. She's had enough. She can't get the energy to continue feeding. And that's what happens.
Fantastic, mate. That's absolutely brilliant. Now, I've got a few more questions. Okay. What are your thoughts on using lights for nighttime squid fishing? So we're seeing those being added to a lot of boats at the moment. Gerry, go to you, and then I'll ask Paul to say, well, look, we're here as the panel now. Gerry, nighttime fishing on a boat, do you use the lights or you just don't worry?
Well, I'll have the deck lights on, so there's no harm in having the lights on. Light's going to attract squid, so that's a pretty simple one for me, yeah. Have lights on, bring them in.
Yep, cool. And Paul, what are your thoughts about the squid lights, underwater squid lights on boats these days?
They do a great job at attracting micro critters that the small bait fish eat. And in turn, the larger bait fish eat those smaller bait fish, and in turn, the squid eat those larger bait fish. If you look at any commercial squid vessel, they're kitted out like nothing else with light. I've worked on a couple of them, and I've ended up literally having to put sunscreen on my last day because the lights are that powerful. You do get a tan. And there's one thing that the lights attract, and that's the bait fish. And the bait fish attracts the squid. And if you're ever on a commercial boat, don't fall out because mako sharks eat squid.
Yep. Okay. And yeah, absolutely. Certainly. I've just got I don't have the boat transom lights underwater, but we've just got like a $50 LED dangler. Paul, any particular colour that you think's better? Because
Green.
I've heard green personally, but a lot of them are blue. They don't get a lot of boat lights that make green.
Yeah, no, the green's definitely the better light, because it makes your jigs more visible. So the refraction of the green light works better than the red or the blue or even the white. I would take white over blue, but yeah, green or white.
Okay, and a good one from Jay. What are your thoughts on rattle jigs, Paul? Because rattle is an interesting one. I don't think they've got the cult following. I think that rattle has made a difference for me. Maybe it's just because I've swapped to one when shit was going south pretty quickly and it worked. But what's your thoughts on rattle?
So there's two thoughts on rattle. Okay, so the original rattle jigs that came out quite some years ago, I know the designer who did it, and I was talking to him about 5 years ago in Japan, and I asked him, I said, look, squid have only got one small percussive ear that only hears a certain frequency. Why the rattle? He says, oh, fishermen love rattle. And he's right. The first thing you do when you walk into any tackle store, you pick up the lure and you do this. Guaranteed you all do it. Don't say you don't, because I've seen you all do it when you walk into a tackle store. Fishermen love rattles. The squid can't hear that one in that particular jig, so it doesn't affect the catch either way. It's not a good thing or a bad thing because they can't hear it. It just makes you more confident casting it. That said, in recent years, another company, which is Yamashita, have designed their rattle jig, and they build it with the frequency that squid can hear. Now, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing because the food that squid eat don't rattle. So I know that they'll be able to hear it. Will it attract them to that jig? I just don't know. I haven't seen the research to support it or not support it. It could be a good thing because they can actually see it better if they can hear it. They can actually hone in and try and concentrate on it. Or it may do the opposite. They may hear it and then go, well, I'm not too sure about that. Justin's just mentioned there that they feel the vibration. The squid don't have a lateral line. They can't feel vibration. So it's all about the physical viewing. If they can't see it, they can't eat it. There's no lateral line, they can't feel vibration at all.
Okay, now, Luke, particular squid jig colour for certain areas, that was a question. I think that has somewhat true if you're a fisherman that fishes it in the same sort of conditions each time. Personally, I start with my go-to favourites that have worked at the same time of day or same area that I use. What about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's an argument that I've had with one of my best mates who's definitely outfished me on many occasions, and he uses the one jig the entire way through. Like I said, I'll take 150, 200 jigs with me. I'll start personally, with my go-tos for that area or that time of the day. As Paul mentioned, at the night time, I'll go straight to the RR, your reds or your black foils with your red bases, and work my way through. In the daylight, obviously, the old Cephia for me. First thing in first light, I'll crack it out. You'll generally crack the olive out. Vice versa. Many times on the boat together or a land-based, I'll chuck a Cephia out. You'll chuck an orange. It's a personal favourite. It's a Dewa orange. And we'll just go from there. We'll see what's working, and that's where I think just being versatile, and it goes back to the rattle as well. I do have rattles. I don't believe they make much of a difference, but I've got them in there as the arsenal to see what's working, and we adapt to see what's working at different times. But definitely follow the structure of our personal favourites or experience from the past for sure.
Sure. Now, Gerry, quick question for you, mate. Does any of the jigs that Frogleys bring in come in a size 4 or 4.5 or bigger than 3.5?
No, mate. We've got 2.5, 3 and 3.5. It's not a very big range, mate. It's just a start for us.
Yeah, well, we know that Frogleys do test their stuff like no tomorrow, and hopefully that you guys can keep bringing that squid arsenal like no tomorrow, because it's certainly a great company to work with from a tackle store perspective. All right, now, is there a telltale sign of when a squid or calamari is about to ink? Yeah, generally when it's looking straight at you, you've got a chance of getting shot in the face, I would have thought. So try and always point them away from you. Generally they ink when they're about to jerk back, I suppose. Paul, I don't know. You've probably had more ink on you than I've ever had on me. But is there a way of discerning? Does it change colour or does it move a certain way?
No.
Yeah.
You're just going to get ink. So one of the best things I ever invested in was a deck wash for my boat. But second of that, if you are going to try and avoid ink, the trick is don't touch them. Just let them do their thing. You pick them up by the jig, throw the net away. If you set that hook properly, you're going to set the hook in the strongest part of the squid, the head. You just pick it up by the jig. When you pick it up by the jig, they don't ink because you're not touching them. That the ink is a fight or flight mechanism. So when they're fearful or when they're scared, they'll shoot the ink. So if you start grabbing them or if you start putting a net on them and something touches them, they get the fright and they just shoot the ink out. So just avoid touching them.
Now, talking about temperature before, you're saying our temperature, Paul, is very conducive to breeding down here in Melbourne. A question that's come through is that, would you say temperature specifically affects breeding season? Now, I think that's an interesting question because what you're saying is in the regenerative rate of the species, is there an actual particular breeding season and how much does temperature affect their breeding cycle here in Melbourne?
Yeah, in Victoria, we don't have a season. It's all year round. So they spawn at different times. So as I said before, I'm lucky to have a spawn map that I worked on over the last 15 years. So I can just go to where I know they're going to be spawning. But generally, you'll find when the water temperature is between 14 and 19 degrees is when they're going to be spawning the most. So you'll find that in the autumn and spring months, the spawn is stronger. So you probably, when I say we have 14 spawns a year, you might find that 10 of those 14 occur in autumn and spring because that's when that water temperature is conducive to them spawning. That said as well, when you are looking at surface temperature on your GPSs or your sounder, you'll find that that's for the top part of the water column. Now, squid are a benthic creature. Well, southern calamari are a benthic squid that hold the bottom. So the water temperature is always going to be different in 10 metres than it is in 1 metre. Or if you're fishing in 10 metres, the water at 10 metres is very different than it is in the top metre of where you're fishing, which is why a lot of the big offshore squid are caught in summertime when the water temperature's a lot cooler at deeper range.
Okay, that's a very good point. So we certainly catch a lot while gummy fishing. They follow up the baits or attack the baits in offshore reefs. And I remember in one of your talks, you said if you wanted to go out and pick a depth, Paul, that you would be fishing 8 to 12 metres or even 10 metres plus. And that was something that I started doing in Port Phillip Bay quite a bit more to try and learn how to do that and find those grassy areas where they are. And fishing offshore with another Just Your Average Fisho, Anthony, he's certainly showed me how that can really happen offshore. That's probably an area that, how would you go and explore that more? Like what sort of, you're still looking for grassy beds? Like how are you finding that on the sounder? Like tell us a little bit about that.
This is more for the boat anglers. I know it's tough because there's a lot of land-based guys there, but this is more for the boat anglers. You've got thousands of dollars worth of electronics on your boats generally, and becoming intimate with those devices is critical if you want to find that grassy bottom in much deeper water. I would suggest to anyone who doesn't know how to properly read their sounder to spend a couple of hours in a metre and a half, look over the side, what's on the bottom. You can see it with your eyes, and then look at your sounder. Understand what you're seeing. Then when you're in 30, 40 metres of water, you just got to look at that screen and go, I know exactly what that is on the bottom because I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yep, cool. Now, Gerry, a bit of an interesting question here. And from your retailing perspective, the question is that, if you go into a tackle store, there's bins of jigs and there's some at $2.99 and $5.99 and then there's some at $29.99. How important is price and what do you look for in a squid jig if you're going to buy some new jigs? What do you think is important to look for when someone goes into the store, and how important do you think quality versus quality between the prices is when you're choosing a new jig?
Yeah. Look, I honestly think any squid jig on the wall is going to catch a squid. The things I would look for though is a good spike. So you want a nice sharp spike. Something that's not going to rust away straight away too is also handy, and a good tough cloth. If you're going to have sessions catching, or you can only bag 10, but if you're going to catch more or whatever, squid have got a pretty tough beak, or very tough beak. So having a nice tough cloth is a pretty big deal. So, spending up to $20 or more you're going to get a good cloth and a nice good spike, which can help a lot. So, yeah, it definitely helps.
I can actually demonstrate that perhaps for this person a little bit. So, and Paul will really appreciate this, I'm sure. So here is one of the original Shimano Cephiers, and they actually ended up making these in their second series and beyond by Yamashita because the cloth quality was really bad. And on these cheaper jigs, you'll see, and it's hard to see, the cloth weave has actually got high gap. Where if you look at this beautiful Gangcraft size 3 dead butterfly, the cloth weave is exceptionally close together. It actually will feel smoother as well in some respects, depending on whether it's a Chimera or what sort of cloth it is. But on more expensive jigs, and this same, if you look at this Clicks one as well, the cloth weave, that's a Chimera one, so it's flashing a bit more, but the cloth weave is very, very close together versus a cheaper jig. So often you'll find that 2 bites on the back and your cloth starts tearing away on a cheap jig, where on a more expensive jig, because the cloth is so tightly woven, and Paul can tell me whether I'm absolutely talking shit or not, it's just an observation I've made, that that on the more expensive jigs, certainly the cloth is far better quality because it seems to be more tightly woven and can be attacked from a lot more bites.
Yeah, and as Gerry mentioned, that beak is super strong. So if you catch a swordfish, you cut it open, the one thing that remains in its stomach is the squid's beak. That's how tough it still is, and that acid will burn your skin. So you did mention that the cheaper ones do tear a lot more, and they break a lot more, and the barbs blunten off a lot more. So I don't think there's such thing as a bad squid jig. To be honest, they're all good. But if you do spend a bit more money, you'll find that not just the weave being closer together, as you've mentioned, but the material they're using stronger, the barbs stay sharper longer, and you'll be able to sort of the false economy side of it. You need 10 cheaper jigs to do the work of one good quality jig. So there's a reason why they are more expensive, and it's not because they use cheap and nasty gear to make their jigs. They do spend a bit more money building that jig to make it last a lot longer for you.
Sure. Okay. Now, Gerry, I'm sure you've fished Westernport a little bit. Have you ever fished the Flinders area? And a bit of a question that came through pre-show was, do you ever bend your barbs up where those tougher weed patches could be, so you don't hook the bottom barbs on the weed and lose your jigs, or because you've got an infinite amount in the factory you can have sent to you, you go, I don't care?
I've never done that. I do know that Flinders area, like, off the pier, you see so many people losing squid jigs off there. The young kids around there love snorkeling around that area. I've never done that. I just upgrade my leader a little bit more.
Okay, sure. Now,
good idea.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's a good one. It's like the people that go into the golf ball dams and on golf courses and collect all the golf balls. I've seen a few people down at Portsea get jigs as well. Question for Luke: best action for working your jig, and is it different for either pier? So let's say you go to a pier in Westernport Bay or one in Port Phillip Bay. Are you changing your action at all, Luke, or is it same whippy action each time, mate?
Yeah, in terms of crossing bays, I'd probably ask Paul or Gerry over for the Westernport side, just because I don't fish the piers over there. A bit out of my jurisdiction, but with regards to fishing in Port Phillip, yeah, I will absolutely. If something's not happening, or if a violent jerk and a fast retrieve isn't seeming to be working, granted we're casting quite a fair way out with some pretty good quality braid and a 7.6 rod, or an 8 sweep or an 8.6. Yeah, absolutely. I'll change it up from a fast jerk and fast retrieve. And then how many times I've caught some solid squid while I'm looking on my phone or replying to a text, doing zero action at all, and my jig's probably just fallen to the bottom and been attacked. That obviously senses to me as well, probably be a bit less violent and slower on the retrieve. So yeah, I'll change it up on that here. But the other boys can probably answer for more. Do they fish differently on Port Phillip, Westernport?
Okay. Gerry, do you change your method at all land-based, or and I suppose in the consistent pantsing that you're getting from Amy, Gerry, is that because her action is better than yours? She's good at jerking. I think that's a rude thing to say.
Well, she is pretty good at that. No, I don't think I change it too much, mate. No. I'm a little bit thrown off by that. I think land-based, I'm probably not as aggressive. When I'm in the boat, a lot of the time too, when I'm in the boat, I'll let the boat do the work too. So I'll put it in the rod holder a lot of the time and sort of let that do the work. But yeah, my action doesn't change too much, mate, now.
Okay, sure. Now, a couple for Paul. Paul, the invention of the tip run. You know, Yamashita do a lot of tip run jigs.
Yep.
I know that. I had a few jigs which were known as Crazy Tigers or whatever, that had the sort of the resin heads on them with the tip run style.
TD spiders.
Yeah, TD spiders and things like that. Now, tell us about the tip run technique and what makes it different. And do you think it's something good to master and certainly have in the jig box?
Look, tip run's very different. So tip run is, the other word they use for it is drift technique. I suppose anyone who's done any slow pitch jigging or light jigging for other species, it's very, very much the same. So you work the jig vertically up and then you just suspend it. So you don't let it fall again, you just stop it. So you work it up, turning the handle at the same time, then stop and let it sit for a bit. If you don't get any hits, you can either work it a bit further or drop it back down again. The one thing you'll find, the difference between the jig isn't so much the weight that it carries, but where the toe point is located. So you'll find on a tip run jig, the toe point's located above the head, and on a normal jig, it's on the front. So that's the biggest difference between the two, because if you've got it on the front, all it does when you work vertically is that, and fish don't swim like that. So you want to be able to do it this way. So the toe point is right here. It causes better water pressure on the back of the jig and causes it to move left to right.
Okay. And one before I go back to Luke for you, Paul. Harry Sellers, thermal storage cloth, your thoughts?
Well, I don't know. Look, I've seen it. I've used it for years. I've got a couple of jigs here that have got it, a couple of Yamashita warm cloth ones. I haven't, look, I don't know enough about the science on the temperature stuff. So I'm not going to try and bullshit to you. I don't understand it. But from what I've used, I haven't noticed a significant difference. I do know the cloth does retain temperature a little bit better, but whether that makes it different or not, because you've got to look at it, that the fish in the water, they're the same temperature as the water. If I add a degree of warmth to that, is that going to put them on or off? So, look, I don't know either way. They're not bad jigs. Yamashita make great jigs, but I just don't know enough about it to comment any further on it.
Okay. And now, Lukey, now you have a load of jigs like I have, and probably not as much as Sir Paul Carter, OAM, but we'll go with that you've got a lot. There's a question about how important is cloth, and do you have many nude jigs, and have you used nude jigs? And I think that, Daiwa is probably the main brand that sells the nude range. Tell us what your thoughts are, and then I'll add my thoughts.
Yeah, look, I do have personal opinion on that. It's purely based on experience only. I do have one nude jig that I have in the collection to use, and that is the Daiwa Pilchard colour nude. I have had some success with that. Apart from that, I've found everything else to be absolutely rubbish and give me no return. Not pumping Paul up here, but the Gancraft Uojia, which is the nude edition of Gancraft. I've had some success with the Uojia style, the nude one there. I do also collect the Gancraft nudes for a collection purpose, but personally, I'm cloth all the way. And that's just my own personal experience. Apart from that, Daiwa Pilchard colour. That's it.
Yeah, those Daiwas, personally, I've had no success with them, and would like to think I can smash a bag of squid with you, Lukey. I haven't tried the Gancraft. I'm prepared to give them a go because I haven't got them in the collection as yet. But nudes, I think I gave you all of mine to sell, I'm pretty sure. So
yeah, and I struggled.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'd like to hear from Paul, like the Uojia for me, I have a visual attraction to them, and because I'm a collector, I don't actually use them. But visually, they look awesome.
So, Paul, your thoughts on nude without cloth?
So these are a couple of new ones here. Now, I'm just going to correct you on this one, Justin. You mentioned Daiwa were the ones that sort of started doing them or most known for them. So these two here are both Uojia, as Luke mentioned. They're both hard body jigs that don't have a cloth on them. This one was made in 2004. Daiwa didn't start making those till about 2010. So Gangcraft were the first ones to start doing them in this style. This one's my favourite colour. You physically can't buy that one. I printed it myself. Sorry, guys, you can't get it. The main difference between the two is when you look at a cloth jig like this one, it's got feathers and it's got a cloth that slows its movement down. So it causes it to plough wider. So left and right wider, and then the action on it's a little bit slower. Whereas with these things, there's no cloth and there's no feathers. So they're a lot more streamlined. They swim faster and the action's a lot tighter. So if I'm in an area where there's a heap of like slimy mackerel or yakkers that move really fast or garfish, then I will often use one of those jigs because they move differently in the water.
Okay, cool. Now, we've got 2 more questions. We've been going for a fair while and then we'll announce some prizes because I really appreciate you guys' time. Now, but I'll ask these both, one question to yourself, Paul, just on the science of it, but then another question to all of the panel members. Paul, the Ikejime or Ikejime to
Ikejima. I just walked away from there too.
You did. Just go grab it because from one of your talks, I think it does make a big difference. A lot of people, when they're boat catching squid, chuck them in a bucket, they die a horrible death. I do think it does make a difference to kill the squid, but they actually have 3 brains, if I'm not mistaken, from your talk, or something like that you need to make sure you spike them correctly. Can you just run us through?
3 hearts they've got.
Okay.
They got 1 brain, but it does have 2 big lobes that come off the side, which are just for sight, so they're visual lobes. And the idea is to kill it in 3 spots. So the first spot you want to kill is the left or right side. And I'd recommend anybody, because I haven't got a squid handy to show you how to stab it. That's the tool. It's got a half crescent moon sort of shape to it, so it doesn't cut fully through the squid. But what it does is it severs the connection between all 3 hearts. So the first one you do left or right, then the second one you do is the opposite side, left or right again. And then the last one is through the brain itself, so between the eyes and upwards, and that'll kill it outright. But these are ones that are made by Yamashita. The most important part of it, I don't know if you can see it on that camera there, is on the side there. Let me put it in front of that white thing there. You might be able to see it on the side. When you go to a pier or something, and I haven't got a jig handy, and your barbs bend, you can put your barb inside that little part on the side and bend them back again without cutting the hell out of your fingers. So that alone will save you heaps on jigs. And they're only about 10 or 15 bucks. I think complete angler 11, lofty 11 in stock.
Yep, for sure. Absolutely. Always got them down there. All right, now question to all of you, and I'll start off with Luke. Luke, the question is, how do you best clean calamari? Now, I know that you would eat the things raw, and the best way that they're done Greek is the whole thing de-gutted, basically in the deep fry. Because you guys are horrible. You leave the skin on, you eat the wings and everything. That's just not how I do it. But tell us, mate, how you clean them.
Yeah, mate, goes back to my grandfather. I was being far too slow and far too particular, trying to clean every part of the skin off at least anyway, starting with the sort of above the eye into the hood, sort of breaking the point where you can then pull the head out of the hood. And we'll just use my hands personally to get as much of the gut out as I can. I'll clean a little bit of the skin off, but I will actually leave a fair bit of the skin on as well. Absolutely, wings are paramount. I can't believe anybody would throw them away. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I'll just clean the guts out, cut the tennies off just above the beak, below the eyes, and then pull the beak out from underneath the tennies, and then keep the tennies as one portion. Cut the wings off, ring the hood, and then cook the wings as a whole. But just clean them by hand, and I'm not overly fussy, mate, like you. Yep. Princess.
Yeah, I'm pretty restaurant grade on my boat. Now, Gerry, how do you prefer to clean them?
Not that well. Not as well. Like that's for sure. Generally, it's in a plastic bag and in the freezer for bait. But when I do eat them, I know that you can buy a tool called a Squid Easy. Squid Easy?
Yeah, Squid Easy.
Yeah. I've seen people use them and they look great. Obviously, they've had a lot of practice with them. I find it much easier just to use my hands. Pull the head out, flip the hood inside out and clean it. And yeah, that's about it.
Nice one, yeah. Look, Paul, I don't know if you can add anything to that. I'm a boat fisherman, so I just lop a little bit off the top of the hood, and obviously stick them in the scaler bag. There's a lot of good ones available. The Gaff Man one's pretty good. That works pretty well. There's also the hook 'em ones. You know, there's the tumbler bag from, you know, there's all different ones. What are your thoughts, Paul?
Look, I don't eat them. I reckon they taste like shit, so you can have them all. I do clean them for other people though when they want them cleaned. And the one thing I will tell everyone to go out and buy is a wooden spoon, because the most difficult part about cleaning squid when you want them really clean is turning them inside out without breaking the hoods, especially if you want the rings. If you get a wooden spoon, when they're laying flat, you can just touch the tip of the squid with your wooden spoon and just push, and the friction will roll it over onto itself. Try and keep it as slime-free as you can. Keep a lot of water on it, and it'll grip beautifully, better than your fingers. You'll see people sitting there piss-farting around with their hands and trying to roll it, and it's like that 18-year-old kid for the first time at the pub trying to put himself through the prophylactic period. But it's a difficult process to do it with your fingers. You're better off. Don't laugh, Ben. I can see you there in the background. It might have been him younger. No, it is much easier. If you've got a wooden spoon, just push down a little bit of pressure and roll and push through, and it'll spin inside out perfectly.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, now, producer has chosen some fantastic prizes, and prize number one, that was the major prize tonight, thanks to Mikey at the Rod Rack, which was the 8-position powder-coated rod rack. Pat Elberly, mate, you... well done. You've got yourself a prize. Thank you very much for following Just Your Average Fishos. Although I can't say that you're an average fisho with some of the squid that you get, mate. You're a very experienced fisho. Congratulations. We'll put you in touch with Mikey at the Rod Rack and get your new powder-coated 8-position rod rack out to you. Follow Mikey at the Rod Rack Facebook page. That would be fantastic. Prize number 2, bass. Best method to clean calamari. Well, what's the point of catching them if you can't clean them properly? You've got yourself the complete angler ringwood squid jig pack. So as soon as this COVID-19 lockdown period that sucks, you can go out there and give those jigs a try. Just contact me through the page, Pat and Bass, and I'll make sure these prizes get out to you straight away. Final thanks to Mike at the Rod Rack, and of course Lofty and Steve down at Complete Angler Ringwood. They're very big helps. Thank you very much to Paul, Luke and Gerry. Gerry, you're an absolute scholar. Luke, great mate. And Paul, always have been indebted to you for your information. Thank you very much for joining Just Your Average Fishos, a live stream show. I'm going to announce an even bigger show next week for all of the game anglers. So watch out for the advertising that I'm doing on Monday. Might even hit Tuesday morning. We're going to be talking catching mass amounts of the new, well, maybe not so new because we just haven't fished for it a lot, the local southern bluefin tuna fishery here in Melbourne. And we have southern bluefin tuna royalty joining us next week on the show, 8:30 on Saturday night. Thank you to all the panellists. Thank you to everyone that's asked questions. Congratulations on your prizes. Thanks to the people that give out the prizes. Justin at Just Your Average Fishos. Till next week at 8:30. Hopefully you can fish soon.